Hello and welcome to Bury Our Bones with Cinema, the podcast that lives, breathes and dies classic movies, not so classic movies and everything in between. I have the pleasure of once again being joined by the Riggs to my Murtar, the Bodie to my Johnny Utah, the wonderful Mr. Simon Keet. In today's episode, we enter the Village of the Year competition with Edgar Wright's 2007 buddy cop love letter, Hot Fuzz. So join us as we sit through 3 hours of so-called acting, chase around Sandford looking for an escaped swan, and finally try and work out why Leslie Tiller was murdered.
Good evening and welcome to Inside the Actor's Mind, the show that delves deep into the psyche to find out what makes a great character, a great performance, and what makes a great actor. I am Julius Oxbridge Teeth III. Join me as we go deep into the actor's mind. I'm Julius Oxbridge Teeth III. Won't you join me next week as we go deep into the actor's mind?
It was April 20th, 2007 when Hot Fuzz came out. Can you remember where you were? Can you remember your first time watching it? Did you watch it when it came out? Did you watch it years later?
So, I just remember, when was Shaun of the Dead?
So Shaun of the Dead was 2004.
So Shaun of the Dead was, when I didn't see that at the cinema or anything, I guess I was too young, right?
Yeah, we were 12 at the time.
But I remember it being on TV all the time. Like, I don't know what channel had the licence to it. But
I think it would have been Channel 4, Film 4, something like that.
So it was just on all the time. And I remember watching it and like laugh out loud funny kind of thing. And I think my older brother's friend Jordan liked it or something. Or maybe he brought it around. But I just remember seeing it over and over again and thinking, wow, this is a great movie. And then I remember like a sort of similar looking movie coming along that I kind of just, it was on in the back, it was sometimes on. I just never really got invested in it or find it that funny. Oh. And then, and then fast forward to like when I had Tinder. And there was a certain ilk of people on there that I was just really late to the party with, I think, because there was a certain type of like girl on there that would like it was common to say favourite hobbies or something, and it was always like, oh, I love Louis Theroux. And then underneath it, there's sometimes if you had Louis Theroux, there'd also be into Hot Fuzz. And I was like, oh, it's a bit of a thing.
I don't think that was a euphemism, what with it being on Tinder, do you?
And, so it's like, I don't know. So I thought, what is this about? Like, have I missed something here? Like, and then I've recently, learned since that it's like a bit of a cult movie, and then people absolutely love it, don't they? They love it, and so the first time watching it more properly really was yesterday, from the whole way through.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because like, I'm probably firmly in the love it camp,
yeah.
Like. I think this is... I'm not going to say it's as good as Shaun of the Dead, even though it's quite hard to compare them because they are very different films and they obviously parody different genres but they're still part of the Cornetto Trilogy, which is obviously finishes off with The World's End, which I think is the weaker of the three, although I still like it. But yeah, so it's interesting that we have kind of... Because we obviously grew up at the same sort of time and... Around the sort of time that this came out, and I was probably going to watch it, you probably would have been in a similar situation. So it's a bit odd, really, because I looking back, I can't actually ever go, oh, have you seen Hot Fuzz to you? Like, and it seems like a film that I 100% would have done because I like it, and you know, I'm going to tell my friends about it. So it's a bit of a strange one, really. The
bit that did stick with me when I did see it on TV when I was a bit younger was just the you know, Timothy Dalton with the church spire through his face.
Yeah.
So it always stuck with me, and yeah, I guess I always saw this movie as a bit of a sequel. Do you know what I mean? Like as a sequel to Shaun of the Dead, and it's like, oh, they're even going over those same fences. So I guess it was just a bit lost on me, to be honest. And
I suppose, perhaps you saw it literally as a sequel, and so you thought they were just doing the same shit again.
Well, I knew it was like a cop version, but I was like, oh, well, I've seen the zombie version. I'm not as into the cop version, but obviously they're very different. And, you know, Christina did film at just related stuff at uni. And they looked at this film for like editing and stuff like that. So, you know, people do really like it, and I guess I'll tell you how I think of it soon.
Yeah, so I mean, for me, it's similar kind of like remember seeing Shaun of the Dead. So for me, Shaun of the Dead was one of those like perfect sort of like date movies in the sense of like, oh, if you got a new girlfriend, you know, come and watch Shaun of the Dead. You know, we're going to have a laugh. It's going to be funny, and you know what I mean. It's a good sort of like film to use as a kind of testing the waters with a potential, you know, girlfriend or something like that. So that was always. And then Hot Fuzz came out, and I remember thinking, like, when I watched Shaun of the Dead, I didn't necessarily get all of the references and get all of the kind of the homages to different films until much, much later. Whereas Hot Fuzz, because it came out at a time when I was consuming movies a lot more, and particularly like the genre of film that it was parodying in some respects, I kind of got it a lot more. So I got that kind of, you know, in a buddy cop, you know, I mentioned Riggs and Murtaugh, Lethal Weapon, there's always that one who's like quite straight-laced, and then there's the one who's slightly a maverick, and they play on that kind of dynamic to comedic effect in Hot Fuzz. So I got those references a lot more, and so it kind of resonated with me a bit more. And I suppose as well, because it's, you know, another kind of, it's a buddy cop kind of homage, but it's done in England, and often you don't get that. Usually buddy cops are American, and they're often, you know, cool and that. And actually one of the reasons why they made this is because they wanted to make, you know, police officers in the UK cool. You know, that's why they kind of went down this kind of route. And so that's kind of my first kind of foray into Hot Fuzz here. And since that point, it's always been a go-to movie. Like it, you know, we've seen it many a time, and it's just a good fun movie. It's quotable, which is always good. You know, like me and Hannah, we always will be quoting this film in some respect, or if a certain line comes up, we'll always say something, you know. So it's always been a good one. But I am interested when people don't have that same, because I think you're probably in the minority, I think it's safe to say, whereby it doesn't quite have that same effect for you. So
like, there's not really a nostalgic feeling to it or anything. But, you know, watching it this time, you know, I was very in. He's great as the serious cop, isn't he? He's like that really. He is really good, and when he gets you know, when the hierarchy of police officers when he's trying to go above their heads in when he's in London, or I don't know what they call it in this movie, London.
Yeah, London. Yeah.
Oh, they do just call it London. I thought they all pronounce it weird. So, but yeah, it's like I don't know who the first one is. But then it's Steve Coogan.
Yeah, you got Martin Freeman.
Yeah, well
then
done.
you got Steve Coogan, and then you got Bill Nye.
Yeah, that is great. Yeah,
and that feels like a very much a progression of kind of status, doesn't it? Because at the time, Martin Freeman was like the new up and comer, and then Steve Coogan, he's been around for a bit more, and you know, and then Bill Nye's been around forever. So that you know,
all the same. I was laughing at that point. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the things that we quote most is when he says, "Do I have a choice in this?" And he goes, "No," like that. Like, any something happens, it's like, are you going to do that? No, it's that kind of.
And it wasn't long after, you start to realise during, when he catches the train and then he goes off to, what is it, Sandford?
Sandford, yeah. Gloucestershire.
All the editing is done like bush, bash, splash, bash, bush, this. And you know what? Last night I was like, oh, that's probably why I didn't really take to this movie, because that type of, even when it's done in a sort of comic way, that type of...
it's a very Guy Ritchie-esque style.
Those films never been my top favourite movies. But then I was in bed this morning, I stayed up too late, and I just heard Christina walking around the house, like brushing her teeth or shutting the door or getting the makeup out or something. And it was just like, doof, doof. And because I was tired, I was like, oh yeah, that is actually what real life is like. When you're like locking the car up, doing the keys, rushing. And actually, you know what? I think I need to watch this again, to be honest, because I think this morning I sort of had a bit of a revelation in bed. I was like, actually, I kind of get that level of editing. I thought it was all just sort of fast-paced, frantic, annoying, blah, 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 blah. But actually, it's that kind of is what life's a bit more like.
And I think it's a film that does get better the more you watch it, because I think there is so much here to even the things that aren't going to be the things when you first watch it that you pick out as funny. There will be things that you watch the second time that you pick out that are funny, and the third time and fourth time and fifth time, etc., etc. And it gets to that point where you forget little tiny bits. Like there's that bit where Olivia Colman's character is saying something, and then the older officer who goes tits, like that, and it's just funny. And then he does it later. He goes cocks, like that. That's not something wherever, although I have just picked it out of everything, but it wouldn't have been the first thing that I picked out. Everybody's going to go to perhaps, something Danny says or Nicholas Angel says and all of those things. So I think it's one of those ones, the more you return to it, the better it kind of gets.
It does feel like a very well-oiled machine. There's a movie.
That's the thing, like... You can very easily take it for granted because it's a comedy. Yeah. But if you take out the comical elements and just take it and look at it as a film, and the filmmaking aspects of it, as you say, those editing things, as much as you said you didn't really like it, they are done very, very well. And the reason they're done well is then makes the comedic effect even better, because those bits are done well. The editing here is on point.
I am remembering stuff even now, actually, and finding it funny thinking back. So maybe it's having its work, maybe that's that cult movie thing that's happening where it's slowly setting in. Maybe at first it just hasn't really. I think the bit that just came to my head was the swan or whatever, when they're like in the car chase and then there's a swan. Oh yeah,
when he's chasing after the
just right near the end, yeah. And then he swerves because
that whole thing where it's just like, what's the name? Staker, Mr. P Taker, Piss Taker. It's like, okay, well, can you tell me what it is? The editing from that bit to the thing.
That's great casting, that as well. That specific moment as well with what's his name?
Oh God, I have got.
Silence.
Why can I not remember his name?
The Office, the extras.
Oh God,
Stephen Merchant.
Yeah. There we go.
That when I saw him, there's certain things about this movie as well. Like you watch it and that first scene is funny. That scene with going back to the police officers coming in the hierarchy of him. It's funny when you just see what actor it is that pops out. That's quite a good thing. Because when it's Stephen Merchant, I instantly laughed when he was Piss Taker or whatever. And the hierarchy of those officers, the way they cast, even though they're it's like an all-star British cast, you see these guys in all those, not all of them, but you see a lot of these people in a lot of things, don't you? Like Olivia Colman, and she's great. It's great in her small role. It's a film filled
with British TV and film names. Yeah. You'll go, oh, I may not know who that is, but I know what he's been in. You may not know their name. It's that kind of thing. And I think that sets a very sort of good tone, is that you get that editing even when they come in. You get that kind of side swipe across the camera when you get Steve Coogan comes in and then Bill Nye comes in, and then even to the point where he says, "You're forgetting one thing, and that's what the team has to say about this," and then it just, the editing there, if the editing's a bit pants and a bit rubbish, that joke doesn't quite land. And I do find with comedies, I've said this numerous times, but I'll say it again anyway, you can watch a horror film and it not be scary but still enjoy the film. You can watch a thriller and it not be thrilling, still enjoy the film. Same with most other genres. If a comedy isn't funny, it's rubbish. And name a comedy that you don't find funny but you would watch because it's a good film.
None.
There isn't. But there are films where you go, oh, I'd watch that horror film. It's not that scary, but I quite like it.
Yeah.
You could do that a fair bit. If those editing things aren't quite as good, the jokes just don't land quite as well. And so every joke has to land in the right place and at the right time.
The spotty teenagers, like the underage drinkers in the bar, is funny. Like that.
15th of May, 1969. You're 38.
For me, it's when he's clocking they're all underage drinking, and it cuts to the sign of like minors not allowed,
and then he pulls that face where he's just like, I have to do this. This is my duty.
And it does it zooms in on each group of them, and they're all like, and they're all like really
and
young.
It blinds him from the light shines off of the braces. But even that sequence, the way it escalates, where it's like, what's your birthday? 19th of June. What year? Every year. And then out. And then it goes to the final kid and he's like, you, out.
Yeah.
The timing of it, which is obviously a lot harder to do. If you were doing this on stage, not that this would be a thing you would do on stage, but if it was a live show or something where it was filmed just, statically, the timing of the performance has to be on point. And that's not to say it doesn't have to be here, but it comes back to how it's put together. That's a lot of those funny bits come because of how quick it goes to the next thing and how it's like out, next one, bang, next one, bang.
It's sort of not afraid of like the violence as well, is it? Like it just out because it's those guys that's done like Shaun of the Dead and that. It comes out of nowhere. And you're like, fuck,
it's really gory. Like when the chimney falls
that
on.
That is grim. I didn't remember that part.
Yeah, Tim Messenger's head, and he's like,
"Hi."
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, every character in here has their own element of being funny in a different way.
Adam Buxton.
Yeah, Adam Buxton. He's quite good here because he, what is it he says when he's like he's trying to get a headline? He just says the most inappropriate things. I don't think that's appropriate. I can't think of what he says now. He's funny in play. Even like the smaller characters, like there's a guy called Kenneth Graham. Trying to see who he plays here. Where is he? He plays James Reaper, and he's one of the villagers. But like even he has like there's a bit in it where I can't even remember the bits. So I don't even know what I'm saying about it because I can't quote it or anything like that. But his delivery is on point in places. I'm kind of going around in circles here, so I'm going to move on to a different point because I don't really know where I'm going. So obviously it was made, you can tell it's a smaller budget kind of film because they use like actual proper locations rather than sets and stuff like that. But it doesn't look...
I think that's that's one of the good things I like about this movie is you feel like you're in the town. And it's very much like we're not that long ago watched American Werewolf in London. It's like it's a bit different because that pub they go into, but you get a bit of that vibe, don't you? Like the local town. That
whole village is a little bit kind of new boy coming in, and yes, they're very accepting, but it's in a sort of slightly menacing kind of way, isn't it?
Do you think you would have suspected? Spoiler alert. Timothy Dalton as the main villain. Would you? Because because I remember the end set piece of the movie. I don't remember what my first reaction to it would have been. I know through trailers and stuff, you always kind of know who the villain is anyway. But do you think you would have saw it coming, like that he's like one. That he would be the final boss.
So it's kind of like a false red herring in a way, isn't it? You know, because the very first time you see him, he's like, "I'm a slasher," and it's like, "What?" It's like, "I'm a slasher. Arrest me of prices," and he, you know, goes on. You know, I own the you know, the superstore and what have you. So, but then obviously as it goes on, you find out actually that the whole village are involved, and it's a much wider kind of thing. So it kind of works in that way because there is something really menacing about Timothy Dalton. Like everything he says is like a double meaning. He's like, "Oh, you must see what goodies." What does it say to the actress in that, or the slightly ditzy?
I like that actress, by the way.
Smash your head and see what falls out. You know, it's always, you know, there's a reason why Nicholas Angel is a little bit suspicious of him.
I guess
you look at it.
I guess it's obvious. Yeah, I don't know why I said it's. You know, he's clearly a villain in this, isn't he?
But
I guess
there's an element
of
I think that's where the film kind of works, because it flips those things on its head. Because you look at that and you go, well, clearly he's going to have something to do with it. Clearly it's too obvious for it to be him because he's making all these things, so he's not going to have anything to do with it. And then you find out, oh no, he does have something to do with it, but it's actually a much wider thing.
Yeah.
So it's that thing of, even in terms of its narrative structure, it is very, very sophisticated in that it does those things that you kind of expect to do, but then twists them slightly and, you know, takes you in a slightly different direction.
I absolutely loved the payoff of like the whole town being involved, and every like death has a different reason. Every sort of murder has a different motive behind it. It's all really explainable in their like small town, like it all like sort of, that's really clever actually. I really appreciate that, and that was very satisfying.
And that's the thing. All of that stuff could have been forgotten about for sake of jokes.
Yeah,
you know, like nobody's really going to watch a comedy film to have, you know, really interesting, intricate storylines and really, you know, logical things happen. But actually, it still does that. And I think that's what takes this from being a good comedy into one that, you know, sometime later people are still talking about and still hold it in such high regard, because it's not just a funny film. It's more than that, you know.
She's great too, that lady in Motherland. I was just about to say, you know,
is that Leslie Tiller?
Yeah, I think so. She's always,
she was fucking murdered, don't you know?
She's always funny in everything she's in.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like I'll go through the cast because I think there are so many names that are recognisable to, you know, viewers of English TV and film. So obviously we have in the role of Nicholas Angel, we have Simon Pegg, we have we have Nick Frost as PC Danny Danny Butterman. We got Martin Freeman, who plays the Met Sergeant. We have Bill Nye playing the Met Chief Inspector. We have Stuart Wilson playing Dr. Robin Hatcher. We have Lorraine Hilton playing Amanda Paver. Anne Reid as Leslie Tiller. Kenneth Cranham as James Reaper. Adam Buxton as Tim Messenger. Stephen Merchant as Peter Ian Staker, Piss Taker. We have Peter Wright as Ray Porter, who's the landlord of the pub. We have Timothy Dalton as Simon Skinner. Jim Broadbent as Inspector Frank Butterman. We have Paddy Constantine as Andy Wainwright. We have Rafe Spall as Andy Cartwright. We have Kevin Eldon as Sergeant Tony Fisher. We have Carl Johnson as Bob Walker. We have Olivia Colman as Doris Thatcher. We have Edward Woodward as Tom Weaver. We have Bill Bailey as Sergeant Turner. We have Paul Freeman as Reverend Philip Shooter. We have Rory McCann as Michael Armstrong. We have Alice Lowe as Tina. We have Ron Cook as George Merchant. David Threlfall as Martin Blower. Lucy Punch as Eve Draper. And David Bradley as Arthur Webley. Now, just going through that list of names there, there's a lot of names. And so many people who are recognisable in things. You know, maybe not in their name, but you'll go, oh, that's the person who's in that programme, or he was in this, he was in that, they were in this, you know. And I think that really helps it, because it is that kind of who's going to crop up next in that, you know. Yeah. If you know, you know, but if you don't, it's not a bad thing. But if you know, you go, oh, it's Bill Bailey playing the officer at the, you know,
reception.
at the front desk, you know, nobody tells me nothing, you know.
It was Lucy Punch, sorry. It was
Lucy
the one
Punch,
that
yeah,
makes
playing
me
Eve
laugh all the time.
Draper. And she, you know, her laugh in that is, oh no, I kiss thy lips. You know, the fact, you know, that whole, like, I've seen shows like that Shakespeare show, and it's just, you go, that is so accurate, where people like think, oh, that would be really cool if you do this.
So did this catch on? Is this gone worldwide, this movie? Or
yeah, it has been a big success. I don't think it is perhaps as big as Shaun of the Dead, but I think Shaun of the Dead certainly helped this, because it was like, oh, it's got.
It's almost a bit more niche, this one, because it's very much a British type of. I guess Shaun of the Dead is just as, I don't know. What do you think?
I think it probably is about the same in terms of. I think perhaps the niche is in some ways is the fact that it's British officers and the way that they kind of act and the way that they are, you know, like the whole reason why they, you know, they do that first scene where he goes to the pub and he arrests everybody. Obviously he does all that paperwork and he's got 2 pens and he does it like he's almost like doing it like he's loading guns.
Yeah.
And it's the whole point. I think they said the whole point of doing that was to kind of get across the point that a large amount of police work is paperwork, from what they, you know, in their research, what they found out. But it was made on a budget of just about £8 million, obviously being a British film, which equates to around about just over $10 million. Opening weekend, it made $5 million back. Domestically, so this would have been domestically in England, it made 18 million quid. And then worldwide, it made 64 million quid. Wow. So, a resounding success by all means. And I think it's one of those ones where it kind of kept that trajectory for that, you know, those 3 people, you know, Nick Frost, Simon Pegg, and Edgar Wright. More so for perhaps Simon Pegg and Edgar Wright, because they're the ones who wrote, and Edgar Wright directed it, but wrote with Simon Pegg. You know, that they're actually a good mix and they're somewhat bankable, you know, not mega bucks, but they're bankable for what is a small, you know, small comedy.
I mean, it's mad because there's great like action sequences in this, isn't there? Like, you know, normally when you get films of similar sort of quality action films that seem to be bigger budget movies, you know, like the car chase is really good actually towards the end, and I don't know, just I guess now I think about it, it's not super over the top stuff, but
it's very realistic, isn't it?
Yeah.
But still done in a way that makes it look very cool.
Yeah.
Like, I think the whole point of, you know, the joke obviously is where Danny's saying, "Have you ever done this? Have you ever done this? Have you ever jumped through the air or firing 2 pistols?" Going like that. The whole thing is like that becomes a joke in itself, because he obviously says that, and that's really funny because he's just asking lots of questions. He's like a child. You know, have you ever done this? Have you ever done that? You know, we've all had, you know, a situation where either as a kid or we've had kids where we've just asked lots and lots of questions and you've got annoying to somebody. But then later on in the movie, all of those things end up happening. So all of the things that he quotes, I've got them written down here just so I can go through them a little bit easier. So, yeah, so when he asks him, have you ever shot 2 guns at once while driving through the air? To which Angel responds, no. You've been watching too many cop movies. This job isn't like that. And then in the second half of the film, every single thing that Danny is asked about, Angel does. He does shoot 2 guns in the air. He does shoot 2 guns while sleeping through the air. The only thing he doesn't do is shooting in the air while screaming, which ends up being what Danny does.
Fair.
So it's like you get the initial joke of it being, you know, him being a little bit stop asking all these questions. Payoff. Yeah, and then it has that payoff because you see all of those things, and it's not really one that you'd initially go, that's a payoff for that joke, but it's one that you look back on and go, oh yeah, he done all that thing. That's really funny.
The one that got me last night was when. What's the Nick Frost called in this?
So Nick Frost is called Danny Basserman, Danny Basserman.
Is it Batterman or Butterman?
Butterman.
It's great. It's such a great. I thought it was Butterman. It's such a great name for especially for the dad who is Slater, isn't he?
Yeah, Slater from Only Fools and Horses.
But I think the bit that got me last night was when he's going to his dad's running off and he's going to shoot him, but then he can't do it, so he lays on his back and he just fires and Gio goes
and again it's that payoff, isn't it? You see him he tells him all about that scene from Point Break and then he shows him and then he ends up having to do it himself. It's that thing of you can see there's a thread going throughout the whole film. It doesn't seem like just a collection of scenes put together and then happens to have some general story. It's a thought out process.
It's great, really.
And it's really, really well made. You don't get any of that without having, a real understanding of what it is you're trying to do. So obviously there are so many kind of homages to those buddy cop genres. The Point Break one, obviously. There's some homages to Bad Boys in there and things like that. And as I say, it's more difficult to do that if you have, you don't have somebody who really understands the kind of the source material of the things that you're kind of making a joke out of. But it's not making a joke out of it at the expense of whatever it is. We're not saying look how stupid it is in these films when this happens. It's going, look how funny this is, but it's only funny because we know that's what usually happens in those films. It's never at the expense of it.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Ryan, so what do you think about the casting of Timothy Dalton? Because one thing that probably stood out for me when I did see this initially on the TV was that he was even in it and he was playing this ludicrous villain. How did that happen? And Timothy Dalton is always this character we've grown up with that I almost felt like I had to stick up for him growing up. You always root for the underdog. It's just everyone's what, all your parents or grandparents, what James Bond do you like? Oh, my favourite Sean Connery. My favourite is Roger Moore. Oh, for me, obviously, it's Pierce Brosnan because that's the one we
Nobody
grew
ever
up
said
with.
Timothy Dalton, did they?
Yeah, or George, to be fair. George Lazenby. But with Timothy Dalton, you feel like you have to be oh, no, he's all right. He's all right.
It always reminds me of that bit in Alan Partridge. I don't know if you've seen it.
Right.
Where Lynn says to Alan he's planning on doing a James Bond marathon. It's a bit of a tangent, but it's worth it because it's funny. He's planning on doing a James Bond marathon over a bank holiday weekend, and Lynn has something that she has to do, and Alan's well, I can't do that. I've got the James Bond marathon, and she says, well, can't you cut out some of the Welsh ones? And Alan Partridge is whoa, 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 what do you mean the Welsh ones? It's the one with Timothy Dalton. He wasn't Welsh. He is Welsh, but he didn't play it as a Welshman. and then he starts going. He says it wasn't 007 licensed to kill like that. It was James Bond, not Jones the Bond. But yeah, I know what you mean. There is an element with Timothy Dalton where, you do feel oh no, Timothy Dalton's all right.
Those James Bond films are fine.
I think if they'd have been released at the same time or in replace of what was the Daniel Craig ones, let's say in a hypothetical world, I think people would have accepted it far more. I think the problem is it came right after Roger Moore. So the problem is that he was a very. I never really liked Roger Moore as James Bond, but he was a very much. He was a very not suave. He was. It's the word I'm looking for. He was very much a quippy kind of guy, and a very much well, my name's James Bond, all like that. Whereas Timothy Dalton played it a lot more grounded, and then not to use the age-old term, but he was a bit grittier and a bit more sort of he was a bit. You could believe him a bit more as a MI5 agent because he just tried to get the job done rather than obviously James Bond ends up sleeping with every woman he comes into contact with. But do you know what I mean? Whereas at the time it didn't really land because I think people thought James Bond was something else than what.
And it was ahead of its time potentially.
I think it was ahead of its time.
One of those movies. I think it's one. Is it when I don't know if actually it is the one where his wife dies in that. Is that George Lazenby one?
That's George Lazenby.
Yeah, okay. See, License to Kill was definitely Timothy Dalton.
Yeah. License to Kill and The Living Daylights.
Okay, fair.
Yeah. I kind of get them mixed up.
Yeah. But I remember them being pretty good. Probably a few years ago, I actually rewatched those, and I remember thinking, oh, it's fun, it's good. And I mean, but yeah, to see him in this, and you're like, oh, it's that, from my point of view at the time, it's like, oh, it's that James Bond guy that isn't as famous as the other ones. But in this, he's so good, actually. And where can we find more stuff that Timothy Dalton is in? Is he in more stuff?
He's been in lots and lots of things. I don't think he's ever been in anything that's really kind of hit the heights of James Bond. Really.
Oh, fair enough. Yeah.
I think that kind of damaged his career a little bit in the sense of everybody kind of saw him as the rubbish James Bond, which I think was quite unfair. But yeah, he adds a gravitas towards this where it does feel a little bit like you could see him as a slightly up himself supermarket owner, because he thinks he's bigger than he is, and he's kind of almost perfect for that role. And it makes a lot of sense actually, because Edgar Wright and Simon Pegg wrote that role with Timothy Dalton in mind, and it was like a pure sort of like, well, here's who I have in mind. He's never going to be cast in it, but when he signed on to play he ended up being signed on to play the role. And they were obviously over the moon, Simon Pegg and Edgar Wright. And apparently the point that they knew they had a good script was they were in a rehearsal, a table read.
Table read.
And basically they all go through the bits, and Timothy Dalton starts reading his part, and they go through it. And about halfway through, he just looks over at Edgar Wright and Simon Pegg, and he just gives them like a big thumbs up and a wink to say, yeah, this is good. And for them, that was like, oh, Timothy Dalton says it's good, so it must be good. We're all right. It's that kind of thing, which is quite a nice story. And I think, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of like potential castings here in this episode, because generally speaking, the people they wanted, they ended up getting.
Wow, that's cool.
Right up and down. There's even some like. Sort of like open secrets in terms of like some cameos that if you know, but if you miss it, you'll miss it. So the Santa Claus in this, who ends up stabbing Nicholas Angel in the like sort of montage, that's actually Peter Jackson.
Are you serious?
That's Peter Jackson of Lord of the Rings. And then this scene where he goes to his girlfriend's, who's at the crime scene.
Yeah. In one of those masks.
Yeah, that is Cate Blanchett.
I knew. That's something triggered in my brain then with that one.
Yeah, that's one that kind of everybody kind of knows. But it's really interesting that they managed to get those big people. And I think both of them were like, we liked Shaun of the Dead, so can we be in your next movie if you make that sort of thing? And it's always good when you have that, because it does feel very much like a film where everybody was working on the same page. Everybody kind of knew what they were doing, and that feels like a film where, I'd have quite liked to have been on set during the making of this film from like a everybody having fun point of view.
Yeah.
Rather than it being like, oh, this is a slog and it's, whatever it may be. So
it feels like everyone's in on it, doesn't it?
Yeah, everybody's working working towards the same goal. But I mean, up and down the cast, as I said earlier, like there's so many names in there, and even when it comes down to like the names of people, there's a little joke in there. So the one I'm going to pick out is obviously Paddy Considine and Rafe Spall play the two Andys.
They're quite frustrating, aren't they?
They're quite frustrating.
They're the sort of characters, even though it's comedy, like, oh, for God's sake, they're so
what
annoying.
Makes you think it's murder?
Yeah.
But the fact that they're called the two Andys, there's a joke at the start when
the Andys.
Yeah, I'd never literally got that before until I watched it with the subtitles, and it spelt it like the mountains, the Andes. Well, why do they call them that? Well, because they're both called Andy. Yeah, and talking to him's an uphill struggle as well, isn't it? And then the bin comes out. Like, that's a funny line in itself, and they build on it by throwing the bin, by then going, fuck off! That, like, most people would just leave it there, and then that would be the joke. But
then,
to have, to build on it, I think is a real kind of sign of, knowing how to get laughs and how to, how to get the most out of a script.
I mean, now I'm seeing their faces as well. Like, I've just got Google open with all the faces of the cast. But Rory McCann's is he the Hound from Game of Thrones?
He is the Hound from Game of Thrones.
And also David Bradley's a Game of Thrones guy. He's
he's
Red Wedding.
Yeah, Red Wedding guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it
Frey, Walter Frey.
That's it. It's so that right there is the thing where you kind of go, they hadn't done Game of Thrones at that point, but they're established actors, and sometimes that doesn't always compute well to being good at comedy. Like sometimes, I always remember. So it's just after The Hangover. And this is a bit of a weird tangent, but just after The Hangover, there was a film that came out called Due Date, which had Zach Galifianakis and Robert Downey Jr. And I'd always liked Robert Downey Jr.'s work, and I thought, him in a comedy, that would be quite good, because he does that quick line in Iron Man every now and again where it's quite a funny line. And then you realise, this is in a comedy movie, and that it's not funny, because it's different from just doing a funny line in a film to doing an actual full-blown comedy. It's like a totally different. And so it's a real credit to that cast that actually everybody kind of adds to it. Nobody feels out of place.
I feel like as well, because it's that, we all know that British towns are funny, like little villages are sometimes.
There are people like that everywhere.
So it feels like being from... If they would know exactly the type of person they're trying to be, I would imagine, when they're doing this. They're like, I'm that guy. I'm the local knobhead. Or I'm like the guy you can't understand that we all go, Olivia Colman is funny, isn't she, in her entrance to the movie, because she is just they're like, I don't like to talk about women like that or whatever. I think, she's not a police woman. She's a police officer.
I don't know, it helps sometimes. It's a very believable it's a very believable village, isn't it? Like,
it is good.
It is incredibly far-fetched in its tone, but there's elements that ground it, because you can see those characters. Edward Woodward, who plays Tom Weaver, who's the guy in the CCTV control
he's great,
room.
Actually, yeah.
I mean, the fact that he's in this film is very much a hint towards the latter stages of the film, anyway, because he plays the detective or the main character in The Wicker Man.
Oh,
so
did not know.
Yeah. So it's almost a bit of a nod to. Remember in The Wicker Man where there was that cult going on and all of this? It's almost a nod to that later on. It's that everything, nothing feels like it's just been put there for the sake of it. It feels like almost like this whole film is filled with Easter eggs, but not in a way where it's like feels force-fed. It's just, we want Edward Woodward in here because we loved him in The Wicker Man, we love him from The Equalizer, and we think he'd be quite funny in this role. And then you get him in and he says, if we don't stamp this out now, we are going to be up to our balls in jugglers. That's just a very funny line. And the fact that he's obsessed with a living statue.
He's when he goes through all the different times that he's here throughout the day.
And then he's just like, what is it going to be next? They're going to be there loitering, as if that's such a bad thing.
But Bill Bailey, that joke, does it pay off towards the end that he's a double? Yeah,
because you think he's just like, he's been there all night and he's now a bit dishevelled and a bit angry.
Yeah,
and then you find out, no, there are two people.
Yeah, that one I was like, oh god. I mean, I don't want to go right to the ending, but it doesn't really let up, does it? Because I remembered the final sequence being the car chase to around the small miniature village, and then what happens to Timothy Dalton with the spire through the face.
Yeah. In the model village.
I mean, I just realised, is it a spire that goes through his face? And I think is it also a church spire that falls on Adam Buxton?
The church spire falls onto Adam Buxton's character, Tim Messenger.
Yeah.
And then when they're in the thing in the model village, the spire goes through. It's, things like that the little links and little kind of, it's almost like he's getting his comeuppance because of what he potentially done to although it wasn't him, but he was part of this conspiracy. It's almost like a little bit of a, here's what happened to Tim Messenger, now it's happened to you in that kind of way.
But it even ramps up even more when I forgot what happened now, but they're at the police station, the bomb gets exploded. Who comes to, like, do you know what I mean? In the police station right at the end, someone comes in shooting off, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I can't remember who it is because there are so many characters here.
It's not Jim Broadbent, is it, at that point?
No, because I think that's...
He's already...
I don't think they've...
Gets stuck in the car with the swan.
Yeah.
Is it the guy we just spoke about? Is it...
It might be Edward Woodward.
Edward Woodward,
yeah,
maybe.
I think
it is.
Yeah, because he comes in with a shotgun, doesn't he?
So just when you think... Cause I really wasn't expecting it to go off again. And that whole bomb sequence in the police station blowing up and that. And then he's like, are you okay? And he's like, sort of bleeding out and stuff. Yeah,
because he's kind of been forgotten about, isn't he? And then he's like, oh yeah, he's the one who's been watching all of this, making sure that's how everybody knows where to go, because he's got all of this, even, and I think just the cast, just in general, is so on point. There's so many funny lines, that are not really funny in terms of like it's a setup and a joke. It's just funny because of the way it's delivered, and funny because it's just something you could actually hear. Like, like when they're in the pub and he's speaking to the landlord and landlady, and he's like, he's the local journalist, but I wouldn't listen to what he say. He wrote about my wife when she she was 50 when I'm actually 53. It's like that in itself is kind of funny, but it's made funnier because of the way it's kind of like, as you say, I can see myself going to a pub in that kind of area of the country and speaking to the landlord and landlady and then being like, don't listen to the newspaper around here, that that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's kind of grounded in a sort of British realism, really, isn't it? And I think, to be honest, why I initially didn't, or why even watching it last night, I have to say, sometimes I got a bit bored. I think it's just because of the genre of the movie isn't necessarily the type of movie I would like. Like, I think, of course I can get behind the zombie one, but because maybe as well growing up, like watching a lot of like Midsummer Murders and stuff with my granddad and things like that, maybe I was just not I didn't want to consume any more stuff like that. Like murder mystery stuff isn't really a genre that I'm really... I know it's not, but it's got that in there, isn't it?
Yeah, it's got that, that mystery. It does feel like, if you take the comedy and the gore out, it does feel like something that would be on at Sunday night. Yeah. Sunday night, 8 o'clock.
I guess the sleepy setting of it maybe was why I have never really been that into it. But, I think that's changed. I think I've changed my opinion. Really.
I think it's one of those.
I had an opinion. Really.
I think it's one of those things where, from what I can gather, that's what kind of put you off it. But then now that you've watched it, you kind of get why that's there.
Yeah.
You get the reason why that it's set in that kind of quaint little village in Gloucestershire, is because it makes all of this other stuff even funnier, because it's like there's this massive death cult where all the village kill everybody who doesn't want to because we want to win Village of the Year again. Like, it's just, you can understand these things happening in the city almost, but you can't really imagine them in a lovely little village where there's one pub, there's one post office and all of that. You can't really see it.
The greater good.
Yeah, the greater good. I just think it is one of those films that I think people will still be talking about in like 20 years' time, and still be going, that is like if you want to do like a parody type movie, not in the sense of like, it's not like a Naked Gun type parody or a scary movie type parody, but if you want to like do a genre movie that has all of those tropes of that particular genre and is funny, this is going to be the one that's held up in high regard. And the same with Shaun of the Dead as well. As I say, I think The World's End is... Have you seen The World's End?
No.
Yeah, I mean, it's very... Essentially, they said that they're... the Cornetto Trilogy is like, they've taken on the horror, they've taken on the action, and in The World's End they took on sci-fi. And that one is that one's funny as well, but for like different reasons, because it's, long story short with that one is Simon Pegg plays I can't think of his name, something, anyway, he plays a character who lives in this particular village. All of his friends grow up and move out of the village, but it's still like, you know, when he was in senior school, and so he does like a thing like, we've got to do the Golden Mile, which is go around all the pubs in the village. And they're going to have 1 point in each one.
Maybe it's ringing a bell.
Yeah, and then as they go through, they realise that their town has been taken over by an alien race. Holy moly. And they've been replaced by everybody. So that's funny, but in different ways. I think it is the lesser of the three.
Hello, I'm Barry Wood. Now, everyone knows that the Bruce Willis role for Pulp Fiction was actually written for John Nettles. Tarantino loved his work in Bergerac and thought, that's the man I need. So he gives me a call and says, what will it take to get Nettles? I says to Tino, because that's what everyone calls him, you leave it with me, son. Anyway, first day of principal photography, and Nettles flips his lid because of the lack of egg and cress sandwiches. And before you know it, I'm called in to play Happy Families because Nettles is refusing to go back on set. I go to Tino's office and I says to him, look, you knew what you were getting. Not only is he capable of playing a mild-mannered detective, but he's also a firecracker. He once nutted Robert Lindsay for leaving a custard cream in his dressing room. Well, I made a deal with Tony. Slap on 500 big ones and give Nettles a complimentary coffee machine and you might just be able to tame the beast. But it was to no avail. In John Nettles' words, Quentin couldn't direct an amateur production of Blood Brothers. The relationship was unrepairable. It's a shame. The Nettles-Tarantino combo could have been something we're still talking about today. There could have been Scorsese and De Niro, Winner and Bronson. It could have been big. It could have been bigger than Taggart.
Now I think about Shaun of the Dead, though, because I've not seen it for a while. It's not... Did they specifically take on this fast-paced editing, like, Guy Ritchie, like... Who's the other director did, like, Transformers, that guy?
Michael Bay.
It's a bit of that, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's a bit... Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, that's a bit more grandiose, and it's kind of...
That, some of those... Or there's even, you know, some of the cuts reminded me of, like, Mission Impossible 2, which I think is John Woo.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that sort of style.
But is Shaun of the Dead anything like that or not? I can't remember.
It is a little bit, but not quite as much. I think, like, the biggest one in Shaun of the Dead is...
They say about they talk about how they're going to get to the pub and their plan. Yeah, and I think it does a quick edit there.
Go to Liz's, pick up Liz. Go pick up Mum. Go to the Winchester, and everybody have that bit. I can never remember that when I'm trying to quote it, and I don't do it justice. I make it sound shit when it's actually really well written. And they also have it as well in terms of like the setup for jokes, and then the editing helps the joke. So there's like a bit where they go. There's a bit where they just kill the first two zombies and they go, what should we do now? And he goes, have a sit down. And then it just cuts to them just falling on the sofa. So it has that same style in terms of like the editing sets up the comedy and helps helps get the joke across.
I mean, I wonder where like Edgar Wright and Simon Pegg come from and like in their how they've learnt how to do that, to be honest, because it's quite, these films come along and they really do stand out, don't they? And they are
yeah, they're really kind of their own kettle of fish. I don't think there are many films that can really sort of hold a candle to the Cornetto Trilogy in sense of they know exactly what they are, they know exactly how to do what they need to do, and they use that to their advantage and to laughs. I think it's quite interesting that they, obviously if you take Shaun from Shaun of the Dead, he's kind of not really reliable, a little bit fickle, a little bit sort of like, you know, I don't know, what do we do sort of thing. And then towards the end of the film he becomes a bit more reliable, whereas here we kind of expect that we kind of expect to see that again because it's the same actor, and then goes, no, now Simon Pegg is playing this really structured, really organised person who abides by the law and, you know, is very, very good at what he does. And that's then played for laughs as well with...
The scene where he's running through town and he's being really serious on his run and everyone's like, hello, good morning, officer, you know, and he's you know, he can't... He's just not... He ain't cut out for that, you know, he's not ready for that. And I think... I think Simon Pegg really still... Obviously, he's the main dude, but he does really sort of steal the show in terms of... He's so funny in this, I think. Yeah, and it's funny, but not in a way where it's like he's like a one-liner in the sense of it's like everybody else has those lines that are quite funny, whereas his are more like it's funny because of the situation. He feels like a policeman. Yeah, like if you've ever met an English police officer or whatever, they're probably, you know, quite serious guys. Yeah. Well, I've met a few serious people, so it's like I just think he sort of does that. It's funny. I think you have to be serious to want to arrest someone and then do all the paperwork like that. Yeah, and it's like even the things of like you can see there's a like when he after they've stopped the actor, what's his name? I keep forgetting the character's name. So when he stopped Martin Blower for speeding, and then later on they go to the play, and as he's leaving, he says, "Drive safe," and then Danny's like, "Drive safe," and he's like, "Well, you know," it's kind of like he knows how cool he is. Yeah. And it's just it just feels very much very, very believable more than anything. Is the kind of like resonating thing here. Does sound like I'm kind of repeating myself, but you know, if any one of these cast members feels a bit out of place, then it's that bit where you go, oh, I don't really like them in it. But there isn't anybody here. To be fair, a film of a similar sort of that have you seen the Wicked Little Letters? You know, the Littlehampton one. I haven't, no. Well, obviously it's quite important to a Littlehampton person to see, so definitely go see, right? But or get it. But yeah, there's a few moments in that where it's, you know, it's a British made movie. It's Olivia Colman. It's got probably some of the same actors pop up, but there's a couple of police officers in it that they poke out. So like a lot of it is there's lots of jokes and there's lots of realistic bits. It's a bit more of a drama, but you know, it can happen in movies like this where some characters just poke out as being like, oh, they're a bit too silly or a bit too or even if there was a couple of characters who were like they weren't funny but they were trying to be funny. It would feel a bit sort of. Whereas there isn't anybody here who is trying to be funny but isn't really funny, but the script... To be fair, in that other Wicked Little Letters, it's like... I think it might be like the police... It's not so dissimilar from Paddy Considine. Isn't that how you say it? I think I used to call him Paddy Constantine. Yeah, I think but it's Paddy Considine, I think. Yeah, so him, like that little duo, they get a bit annoying, but they are supposed to be annoying, and it doesn't ever go on too long, does it? You're not like, oh god, not that again. And that's, I think you know, you hit the nail on the head. They're supposed to be annoying. Yeah. So it's like, oh, you've got a moustache, and he's like, oh, you know. Yeah. You know, and life's like that, isn't it? You come across people as just massive. Yeah, and they're there as well, also to serve that function of being they're the reason why the investigations aren't progressing, because they're a bit stupid as well. And they need that kind of push of going, you need to question these things a bit more, you know. It's also great when they start to believe him, like when I think it's Jim Broadbent and he sort of finally goes, look, this is, you know, it's sort of a showdown between them. Do you know what I mean? With Simon Pegg, Jim Broadbent, and they're all in there, and they go, Sarge, you got to start listening or something. Oh, yeah, it's the Leslie Tiller was fucking murdered thing, isn't it? Oh, yeah, okay, yeah. And I think, like, it's really... It does start to feel good when they start to sort of, you know, listen a bit. And things start moving forward.
And as I say, even that is they've got laughs in there where it's like he goes through the list of people who are murdered, and he goes, Leslie Tiller murdered, and he goes, no, actually, really, of course she fucking was. It's that thing of like, even in those serious moments, they have those elements of humour, and it towards the end where Danny is confronting his dad, and he realises his dad isn't a great person, and that's the reason why Mum left. It's still there. It's still quite funny because you look at him and he does look a bit sort of silly. He's like, why would you do this, Dad? And I think the accent helps a little bit there. But it's interesting because I wanted to just go to, look at sort of like the audience reception and critical reception. And I think, we kind of established that you're kind of in the minority. We're not really being on board with it up to this point. Because a lot of the the audience reception is overwhelmingly positive. You're looking at sort of like high 7s and high 8s, for the scores. But I just wanted to. I found an interesting section from the Empire magazine website in a review of Hot Fuzz. I just wanted to pose it out there and see what your thoughts on it are. So, Hot Fuzz has a much harder job to do than Shaun. That's in Shaun of the Dead. Zombies overrunning the suburbs and being fought off by a pair of layabouts armed only with arrested development and on-demand flatulence is an obviously ripe idea. Big city policemen get sent to the leafy land of cream teas and women's institutes. It all sounds a bit too heartbeat to get the heart racing. Fuzz never quite achieves the boundless creativity of Shaun, but Wright and Pegg throw every joke they have at the concept until they tickle the audience into giddy submission. And I read that, and there's an element of like, okay, he's still saying it's good, but it feels very much like it sounds like if you just get more jokes in there, then eventually it will be successful. And I don't ever feel like it gets to that point where it feels like overkill in any way. And I think he kind of hits the, stumbles upon the point there without quite realising it. He says, zombies overrunning the suburbs, and that is quite an interesting concept and quite funny in and of itself. And the whole thing of like a policeman going to, a quaint little village town with cream tea and women's institutes, I think that for me shows how much, not necessarily better this is than Shaun of the Dead, but how much harder it has to work to get the same amount of laughs. And it's almost more of a credit to the film because it does that without it ever really getting to a point where you feel like it's a bit stupid.
I think for me it's like, kind of see what they're saying. I mean, it feels like, being honest, it feels like watching this, you can't argue with it being good because everything is thought about. So then in my head, I'm like, well, why don't I really love this? And, even watching it again, watching it, this time, you'd think that if it, I try and think, oh, maybe, for starters, why do I even feel bad for saying I'm not really that into this movie? I don't know. I think it's just because I know that so many people like it. But so it's weird to be on the other end of that, when normally it's quite easy to get behind stuff that, is the average person thinks is, well, enough people like movies think.
I wonder how much of that it is in this, because I get the thing of like when everybody likes something and it's kind of always there and always.
It's not that for me though. I mean, I don't really care if people like something or not, but I do feel like when loads of people like something, I guess there is a thing of like, you maybe that's what you're just saying actually, but maybe you think, well, I'll give it a chance. And also I do think this is really good and stuff, but I think it doesn't quite hit those. And I have not seen Shaun of the Dead for a long time actually, so maybe it would be good for me to watch that again. Maybe we could do one on that, because but I think that one, I felt like, and I still sort of stand by how I felt as I was younger, is like I felt like I'd seen a lot of it before maybe, and I think that they made an amazing movie out of this bonkers concept, which I think is amazing, and it's like, it is a well-oiled machine. Everything seems to fall into place and all the jokes sort of land. I never really felt like cringe, or sometimes jokes don't land, like, oh god, or that bit, like you said, those characters. But I think maybe for Shaun of the Dead, you know, like something lines up with a time, like cosmically, it all lines, and they probably had even less money for that movie. I don't know.
Yeah, that was certainly a lesser budget.
Yeah, so it's
You
like
know,
maybe...
I mean, that whole concept came out of an episode of Spaced where they were playing Resident Evil 2 all evening.
I think, like, sometimes things, like, align cosmically. I felt like, for me, at that time, watching Shaun of the Dead, that movie, those directors, those actors, all, like, the premise being right on my street, all sort of aligned to make this sort of, like, knock it out the park film that I fondly remember. And then this one is it's all really well and good, and maybe if I was in a different part of my life and I watched it, it might have really hit the thing. But yeah, but you know, now I can see where they're coming from with that. It feels like it's totally packed full of amazing jokes, really good editing, and fast paced stuff like that. Also, if you're not super into that style of editing, it doesn't really matter if it's a parody or not.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because if you find it a bit like doof, doof, and it's a bit too much, you're like, oh, you can't. Even as a parody, you can't get super into it because it sort of is a wall there of like, oh, it's a bit, they're doing that Guy Ritchie type thing.
You are going to struggle.
Yeah, so it's like, I think a few of those things for me stopped me from really like being able to say, oh, I love this movie. And I think, but I will watch it more, and I can definitely come back to it. And I think that even the things you've mentioned today are just really good. Some of the jokes in it are funny, and some of the jokes I haven't even realised the jokes yet are probably really funny. And I feel like there's a lot of love and care gone into this movie, and I think that's what art and stuff is all about, really.
And I think sometimes it's easy to kind of appreciate how good something can be and see, you know, I think we all get those times when we have somebody or we have something or a film or a piece of music or whatever it may be where we don't really know why, but we just don't like it.
Yeah.
You know, a bit like when I don't really know why, I just love it. You know, it's the same thing on the shoe on the other foot. And it sounds like it's this kind of case for you because it's all there. You know, I'm a little bit like that with Kill Bill. Like ordinarily I would like that film.
Yeah.
But for some reason, I don't know why, I just can't get on board with it. It just doesn't do anything for me. And no matter how well it's made, no matter how good and how, you know, no matter how, I remember we done an unreleased episode on that with Jim. And I think I spent about 2 hours just going, I just don't like it. So that's why we never released that episode.
Yeah.
But I think it's that thing of sometimes it doesn't really matter how good something is. Sometimes it just doesn't click.
It just doesn't line up for you.
Yeah.
And the genre of it. And I think, yeah, I mean, what would make me like this movie more? Probably more of the weird culty stuff. You know,
and a great big bushy beard.
Yeah. That joke made me laugh, actually. He had something.
Yeah.
Because
it just comes out of nowhere.
He had something
it?
you ain't got, and what's that?
A great big bushy beard. You know.
Yeah. Okay. I think, you know what? I also think if I was a little bit drunk, I would have probably loved this as well last night. So I think I think, you know, I would rate this film very, very highly. And I think what makes the world go round is it doesn't always is not everyone likes the same stuff and that. But would I say that I don't like this? No, I do like this. But I've been the sort of person before. It's been like, oh, I don't really get what the fuss is all about with that one.
Would you like to know some interesting little tidbits about this?
Go on, yeah.
So the scene where Danny is obviously about to put Point Break on and Bad Boys 2 with Nicholas Angel, when he reveals the DVD collection he has, that is actually the real life collection of Edgar Wright, his brother Oscar Wright, and his friend Joe Cornish.
That's great.
So they've got their actual DVD collection in there, and I have to say I'm quite envious because the way it's presented is absolutely lush. You know, my DVDs are just all there and everywhere. I need to get a proper unit, but that's a different story for a different day. Originally, apparently Edgar Wright wanted to call it Hot Fuzz, but spell hot with 2 T's. And Simon Pegg apparently objected to it, purely based on the fact that he would have to explain in every press outing why there's 2 T's for hot. And so they just went, we'll just call it normal. You know, just drop that second T. And interestingly, it's the only movie in the Cornetto Trilogy where Simon Pegg's character doesn't fall off of a fence. So in the first one, obviously, he goes to jump over and the fence falls. In The World's End, Gary jumps on a fence and knocks it over. But in this one, he jumps over it and obviously carries on doing the flips. And then it's Danny who kind of just runs through the fence. Which is, I think that's one of the things that you see an awful lot because that's used in all of the trailers.
Yeah, it was in all the trailers back then. I remember.
And I think probably by the time you end up watching it, if you didn't watch it straight away,
it's not going to make you laugh the fence bit.
No, because it's like it makes you laugh the first time you watch it, and then the second time maybe a little less. It's probably, I get why it's there because it is that kind. It's funny, but it's one of those jokes that perhaps it's the least funny joke in the whole thing. I think it's probably there more as like a calling card for the director, you know, going through that Cornetto trilogy. Here's our calling card, we do the fence bit, you know. And maybe that might be why you kind of turned off to it.
I think you're right.
Because you probably looked at that and went, well, they've done that in Shaun of the Dead. I don't want to go and see that again.
It's weird you... I guess if you saw it... If someone like me see a trailer like that, I'd be like, oh, that's a bit of a cheap joke. But that is not really what it is at all. And yeah, I think also I did say to you before this actually, I think this is a sort of cinema movie, isn't it? And I feel like this one would, there's ever like a re-release and a cinema showing of this in your local cinema. I think I'd love to go see this in the cinema.
And just going back to the whole trailer thing, I think it's a good depiction of sometimes how trailers can, because I remember the trailers for this and really kind of excessively hammering that, you know, that fence bit. And almost not, obviously it doesn't really do that in this trailer, but trailers sometimes can make you think you're watching a particularly one thing type of film, and then you watch it and you're like, oh, this film is nothing like that trailer.
That happened recently with that movie about like the Civil War in America, and like, if you've seen that, people thought it was like going to be a really action blockbuster of like the America Crumbles. I don't know if he's in it, maybe he is. It's a woman. And it was just a film about like journalism.
Fair enough.
I haven't seen it, but it's like that was, you know, like the trailer made you think a certain way or something.
And sometimes you can use that to your benefit, and you can, you know, you can almost sort of like set the audience up for a certain viewpoint and then twist their expectations. But sometimes it's just, oh, you've literally just put the only action bits in this film to make it seem like an action film, and it's not an action film.
And to be fair, you know, that's how you sell it. It's these guys again. It's that fence joke. That's how you would promo it. That's probably, I mean, part of it could be the promo that made the film do so well as well, you know. So maybe they did a great thing, because you can't really unsee that fence joke when you know the fence joke from before. I don't know why. It's almost like, you're like, oh, in the first one he doesn't go fence. Second one he does go. It's almost like
the setup of that joke is funnier than the actual joke, because you're almost going, we know what's coming now. He's going to try and jump over the fence and it's going to fall, and then he goes and jumps over it and goes, oh,
this is
what's going to happen?
Movie.
And then you see what happens. So it's almost a case of, the setup of it is funnier than the actual punchline, because it's subverting the audience expectations again. Apparently the first draft of the script included a love interest for Nicholas Angel.
I was expecting that, to
Victoria, and I think they'd done a shrewd move of cutting that out, because I feel like that would have just been a bit forced. I think it's a very nice streamlined script. I don't think it needs any extra subplots.
You know what? Watching this last night, I was like, oh, Olivia Colman must be the love interest, and then immediately she says, I've been around the
you're like, oh no, she's obviously a bit,
she's not going to be a love interest.
And it's that thing of like, you expect it an awful lot, like in buddy cop. To be fair, in a lot of buddy cop there's always a love interest or something,
or someone's married.
So there's always that kind of thing. So I think they made a shrewd move in not having that, because I think that would have been something that was just kind of a bit of an afterthought, and slowed it down. Like you mentioned it earlier, it does just kind of, it just starts and it just slowly speeds up and doesn't really stop until the end. So that, you know, that's a really good, really difficult thing to do. Like, pacing of a film can ruin it, you know. So to have a film that starts off quite hot and quite funny, and then just build and build and build and build. You know, having that subplot in there would have totally killed it, I think. You know, it'd have been like, oh, we're dropping back down into this, and then we're going up here, and it would have felt all over the place, I think. So a nice little tidbit, and it feels very much like, bearing in mind this isn't an independent film, it was made on $8 million, but the fact that the Summerfield, so for any English listeners, will probably recognise Summerfield, a now defunct supermarket. Every town had a Summerfield. That was actually the local Summerfield that Edgar Wright worked in, and they managed to get that. And he based the character of Simon Skinner, Timothy Dalton, on the manager he worked for in that Summerfield, but changed the name because he didn't want it to, you know, come across, you know, too much like he was just berating his former manager. But it's quite interesting because I do like those, you know, when you're starting out and you're a much more independent filmmaker, you kind of use what's available, and so you stick to what you know a lot of the time. Like when I was doing media studies at college, I'd be like, right, okay, we're going to go and make a film. What are we going to use? Oh, well, let's use the old maths building at school. And I think if we'd have done it in the town, you'd have gone, oh, well, let's go over here because that's a really cool area. And you use what you know. And even though this is an $8 million film, I quite like the fact that this is still using that same kind of utilisation of like locations, rather than it being, we've got this budget, let's go and get the perfect thing for the perfect, you know, let's go and build a special set specifically for what we need. I like the idea that they've actually gone into an actual Summerfield and actually decided to start doing it in the Summerfield, like almost to the point where you can see the people who live in that town going, oh, are we going to be in the film? You know, and that kind of thing.
I mean, yeah, because I was frustrated that when they did Littlehampton, the Wicked Little Letters, they didn't actually shoot any of it in Littlehampton. It's all in Arundel.
Bastards.
And Worthing.
I don't like that.
No,
it's a noise. I know they've done a lot of Brighton Rock. They filmed in Eastbourne.
But yeah.
It's kind of interchangeable English coastlines, isn't it? Unfortunately. So even, as I say, I mentioned earlier about the two Andys, like their names being a joke, the Andys, but also the fact that they're called Andy is in reference to the fact that when they were doing research for the film, they discovered that quite a large proportion or disproportionate number of police officers were named either Nick or Andy. So they were like, well, let's name our main character Nick and let's call two of our detectives Andy. And it's like that. Like, obviously, when you watch that, you're never going to know that necessarily, and it's never going to affect the fact when you actually watch it until you go and perhaps research a bit like what I have. But the fact that that is the case just will make it even more funnier when I watch it back, because I'm just like, well, that's just... And I don't really know why, because it's not, you know... It's more just like a nice little sort of... A nice aspect of like them just taking, that's quite funny that everybody's named Andy, let's just call him Andy, and then we build a joke on that as well.
The NWA that keeps coming up as well is funny, isn't it? I mean, that's obviously on the main joke.
Obviously, you know, that's quite funny. For people who perhaps haven't made that link, obviously NWA is perhaps most well known for the song Fuck the Police, or, you know, I'm not going to say it with the same... Yeah, but yeah, so the fact that they're called the NWA is, again, a bit of a nod to, you know, certain things that may be going on later on down the line, but it's also quite funny because it's the name of a neighbourhood watch association, which you wouldn't automatically associate with that. So it just makes it... A lot of the jokes aren't just the joke, it's not just...
They're kind of there if you want one.
Yeah, there's a lot more... You know, there's several layers to them that if you want to peel them back, you can do. So if you had to pick a favourite scene, what scene would it be for you?
I think it's before they even got to the village. You know, it's the one we spoke about already when he sort of is trying to go above the head of the police officers, and
you mean you want to go higher?
That is great.
Yeah.
And like, you know, I've said already, but the cast of that's great. That really did make me laugh. The other joke that really stood out for me as well was the great big beard or whatever.
Big bushy beard.
I mean, that's a joke, isn't it? Not so much a scene, but the scene in the pub as well with the teenagers all like laughing, but like all their braces on and stuff. That whole bit is some of the earlier ones, actually, to be honest, and some of the battles are good towards the end, but the funnier ones for me, it was more funnier towards the first half of the movie, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, all of those scenes are. I think for me, throughout the whole of the film, there isn't scenes that are necessarily better than anything else. I think it's just what you find funny. Like I really find the whole thing when you see him right at the start of the film, you just see him walking, and he's just walking, and there's not really much else going on, and then he kind of introduces himself, and I just really like the line, and of course, advanced cycling, and he does like a little slide on the bicycle, and he's got them glasses on. I find that really funny.
Yeah.
But I think perhaps my favourite scene is the scene where they're watching the play, and it's really bad acting. Again, as I mentioned earlier, because you
relate to it.
I can relate to that and seeing performances where you're going, what am I watching? And then just a bit where they it ends the show, and then. And then he just goes into love me, say that you love me. That I found really, really funny. And then just the lines that come out of that, where he's just like, what is it? She used to be in my school. She's a popular girl at my school. I was like, well, I think she's got a thing for older men. What, with Martin Blower? What makes you say that? I was like, well, we've just watched 3 hours of so-called acting, and the kiss was the only convincing thing in it. It's like that line is again, then gets layered upon it later on as well, when they say, well, what makes you think that Martin Blower, or I can't remember the context, but then Danny repeats the line, and it's like done with like a bit
because he's convincing probably the two
Andys why he needs investigating.
Yeah, and then he just mimics what Nick said.
And the way he does it, he almost like looks at him as if to say, "I've got your back. Don't worry." It's that kind of thing. So that would probably be my favourite scene. I think across the board there are so many lines and so many things, as you probably can tell from listening, that
it's just there's just some really memorable moments, isn't there? There's some memorable grisly deaths. Even the shootout in Summerfield is preposterous but so funny and so cool at the same time, because like that just seems like it was made in the head of a child. Like, when they're walking around supermarket with your mum, and you just want to be like you're in your own little world. It's a bit like school though, isn't it, where someone sits on your table and they're like, what would be the best paintball arena? I reckon it would be like Summerfield or maybe Woolworths.
Yeah, that would be really good, because that's got the big like long corridor.
Imagine that, just me and you doing paintball.
So in terms of further watching then, so what would we recommend to some of our listeners
if they like Shaun of the Dead thing?
Yeah, obviously Shaun of the Dead and World's End, but beyond that,
I mean, to be honest, I didn't really know what to. This kind of reminded me of those old sort of, if you like Who Done It, it's not really a movie, but I love all the Jonathan Creeks.
I love a Jonathan Creek. I think they're great.
That counts, doesn't it?
I think, there's an element of mystery in here where you're trying to work out what's going on. So I think that works. And it's comedy as well in places. Jonathan Creek, it's that kind of understated.
That's true. There's some very British,
dry British humour, kind of. Yeah. For me, I kind of pointed out the things it kind of homaged a little bit. So things like obviously you mentioned Point Break and Bad Boys 1 or 2. So I would recommend going and watching them, because I think you may not get some of the jokes because you've not seen some of the films, and actually if you go and watch them you'll go, oh, I get that bit now. A bit like when, not to bring it back to Shaun of the Dead, but they use some of the music from George A. Romero's Dawn of the Dead, and I never really got that until I watched Dawn of the Dead. So it was like, oh, I get it now. So that makes a bit more sense. I think Lethal Weapon as well.
Yeah, fair.
I'd say the earlier ones are probably better than the later ones, but go through all of the Lethal Weapon films and you'll find something to like in a similar sort of way. Obviously, a much more kind of Americanized. And then Beverly Hills Cop as well. I think those are some good films.
Another parody movie that I gave you, lent you, that George gave me, which is that Chuck Steele one, which is...
I can't say I've watched it yet.
Yeah, which is just a ridiculous parody movie on cop buddy type movie, but he's like really extreme, and it's... I think it's like stop frame animation. Not normally the kind of thing I would normally ever watch, but my friend George gave it to me, and it is very, very funny. And it's sort of almost more an American look on something like this, whereas this is a very British buddy cop.
Yeah.
But really, there isn't much else like this, is there? This specific
as I say,
thing.
it kind of sits on it. It sits on its own. There isn't really anything you can compare it to, really, where you go, oh, that's just like this. Other than the things it's perhaps parodying or
maybe Wicked Little Letters as well, just because it's got like it's
there
set in a
similar
small
sort
town.
of tones in places, isn't it?
And God, even there was like Paddington 2, and it still had Slater in it. I always call him Slater, Jim Broadbent. That was on the other day, and I was like, oh, and then when I saw that the other day, I was like, oh, he's in this as well. They always, in all these types of small British movies, and some of them, they have a real charm to them, actually. This film has a real charm to it. That's one thing I would say. Whereas I don't know if Shaun of the Dead's, I wouldn't say it's charming, but this one I would say it is. It sort of feels more. It feels more
charming.
Charming, yes.
Yeah.
Tyler Durden's Underground Arts and Crafts Club. Meet up with like-minded people just like you. Learn craft skills like soap making, electronics and leafleting. The Tyler Durden Underground Arts and Crafts Club. Coming to a car park near you. Terms and conditions will apply.
Unfortunately, it's come to that time in the episode where we have to say goodbye. We hope you've enjoyed the episode as much as we've enjoyed recording it for you. Don't forget to like and subscribe to wherever you get your podcasts from, and also head over to our social media platforms to stay up to date. We thank you for listening to Jimmy Murphy, Simon Keet and Ryan Etherington. Together, we'll bury our bones with cinema. And it will be a one-button job. Boom, 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 toom, toom, toom.
I have a terrible tendency to just scroll about and if you're talking, when we're doing it, I still find it slightly distracting.
It's a bit weird, but I think it's a bit weird, but I suppose...
maybe if you listen to it back, see if it sounds... I was like, I'm going to have to stop it. You listen to it back,
It's a good job I observed that well, wasn't it?